COVID, the Biden administration reaching almost 10% vaccination. So a lot of people getting the jab. And the first checks in regards to that $1.9 trillion of relief have been mailed out. What's going on, Ed?
Well, I got my check this morning. Being an American citizen and paying taxes around the world, which I do regularly in case anyone's listening, uh, I was eligible for the that amount. And since I don't make a lot of money, uh, I'm in that, what do you call the lower middle class.
Mhm.
And my wife and I got checks. Um, the checks are important, I think, it's a psychological thing. It's not the financing, it's the notion that we're getting over this. Some people are jumping the gun, and we're going to have some real relapses. I hope they're not too terrible. But a wake up call has to be sent fairly soon. If people will just do what they do regularly and not do this extra stuff, partying and drinking and so on, and being too close together, this will all work out.
As we've spoken about the last couple of weeks, Biden's next move will be attempting to pass an infrastructure bill with a price tag that could be even higher than the COVID relief. Senator Joe Manchin, a conservative Democrat and centrist, is a key swing vote in the Senate and has said this week he'd be willing to vote for an infrastructure bill worth up to $4 trillion, but the money must come from tax increases and not increasing the deficit. It does beg the question, where is the money going to come from, Ed?
Well, Biden has already forecast that, and that is a relatively large tax increase on the wealthiest people in the country. The big corporations and people who make $400,000 a year. I don't know if that's individually or collectively. It'd be a small percentage increase. It actually go back to the Obama tax rates, which were fairly generous. And many wealthy people complained when the new ones came in, they were too generous. So I think what Manchin is doing is running for cover, because what he did last time has gotten him in a lot of hot water in his own state and made him a target for some left-wing Democrats. So he knows Biden has this tax bill in the offer, and he's just going to say, well, I pushed for that. I just wonder if the Republicans will come along with any of this. And the reason for it, it seems to me, is that they're deciding to run against Biden rather than run for anything. And that's a shame, because they had an infrastructure bill that Trump just never got around to, maybe half as big as this one, but it was there. And they had to start taking credit for things rather than pushing themselves down the same conspiracy barrel.
Mm. Yeah, Republicans really didn't engage with COVID relief at all. I mean, they didn't release any kind of actual formal statements until after the relief bill had actually already passed. And as you say, it doesn't look like they're going to engage with this upcoming one either.
No, I don't know what their game is, because you can't just play the holdout game. They're giving Biden too much room to maneuver. He's out on the hustings along with Kamala and his wife and others, so-called pushing the COVID relief bill. What he's doing is the same thing that anyone does when they know they have the lead, and that is extending. So what he's doing, knowing that 70% of the American people are for this, he wants to put something on the back of this, which says not only are you going to get checks, but you're going to get some jobs. Every American can see street decay, bridge decay, public buildings that were built in the 30s that are falling apart, stadia, schools, etc. They're going to say, hey, if that gives me a job, I want to do it. The other piece of this infrastructure improvement, though, is getting ready to use the electric vehicle, moving away from the old fuels to the new fuels. That's a big part of this. So if they use the infrastructure, They can also start using sustainable tools to build this new infrastructure and put America in a place for the future. That's his real sale. The sale is not for this job. This one is done.
Let's talk confirmations. Plenty to get through this week. First, Merrick Garland, overwhelmingly confirmed for Attorney General. Look, how in these times of absolute anti bipartisanship, which denied him, of course, a seat on the Supreme Court in 2016, how did Garland win a bipartisan vote?
Not just a bipartisan vote. You got what, 70 or
Yeah,
70
70-30.
plus?
Yeah,
How many?
70-30.
Yeah, 70-30. And the 30 were soft. The Republicans know that Trump left a lot of legacies that they would like swept under the rug. And they want Garland to do that dirty work. And someone has to do it. The January 6th events, all those things that Trump got away with seemingly while he was in office will come back to haunt the Republican Party. So they want to deal with that. And then there's just guilt, real guilt. They know that the Justice Department was really used as a tool for the president rather than for the nation. And they'd done Merrick Garland dirty. So I think almost anyone of his stature would have been confirmed. He's a good man, but I don't think he's an administrator. And he's going to have to get somebody to do that job.
Michael Regan has been confirmed as head of the Environmental Protection Agency. A lot of protections were destroyed under the Trump administration in the name of progress. It was one of the quieter, but I think more damaging aspects of the Trump administration. What are going to be the priorities here?
The first priority is to get the House in order. The Environmental Protection Agency is really in bad shape. And many of its top civil servants have left, so they'll have to hire new people and put in the old orders so that people don't have foul drinking water anymore, so the air's cleaner, and all the kinds of stuff of the past. They're not going to try to deal with anything new. All the new stuff was actually put in effect with Obama, and it was stripped out. They just have to replace it, particularly things about fuel economies, electric vehicles, and the like. It's as though Biden has just picked up the old playbook and running with it. And people like Reagan are good people because they've done the job at the coalface. Doing it nationally is going to be a bit tougher, though. They'll have to learn how to do that. But he will have a lot of fresh faces to work with.
And Deb Haaland has been confirmed as the first Native American Interior Secretary. Hell of a story. And also, interestingly enough, points back to something I mentioned last week, what seems to be a renewed interest in ensuring tribal governance and tribal land kind of has a seat at the table, is kind of looked after under the Biden administration. Any thoughts, Ed?
Well, the first thought is maybe we should do that here
Mm.
in Australia. Getting someone of her caliber and her knowledge and her background into this job is super important. Most of the secretaries of the Interior have been running national parks and doing very little with the lands the United States owns that are not national parks, but border on or in fact we call them Indian lands in the United States that have just gone to ruin. But they are an enormous resource. They have timber, they have all kinds of minerals. And if those places can be harnessed and the opportunities can be provided for the people on that land, there can be a revival of the people and the land, and it'll be great for the American people. I think you dare not say no to Deb Haaland, because that would have been a stink with the left and the right and everybody else, because everyone knows that she knows what to do and how to do it.
Meanwhile, in diplomatic news, North Korea just not coming to the table as they did early in the Trump administration. Warning, as usual, against US and South Korean military exercises. And according to intelligence reports, they may be preparing their first nuclear tests in a year. What's your take on this one, Ed?
This is a scary one, but didn't we talk about this when their leader went out of sight? What was going on? We
Hmm.
still haven't seen very much of him. And my take of this is that he is not entirely in charge. And the reason they haven't heard from them is this is now a committee that's making decisions and not the leader Kim Il Jong by himself. So uh, these backdoor channels work if there's something at the end of the channel. And I think that it's really very unusual that you can't get anything through this, and you can't if you don't know what channel to go down. And this is not diplomats trying to send mail to other diplomats. These are businessmen and women who cross the border regularly, who have coffee and lunch with people, airline pilots, and things like this, who can get messages all the way to the top. Something stopping that. And I dare say that regime, although be muscling up, it is not being led very well.
Yeah, funnily enough, we've actually got the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin traveling through Tokyo, Seoul, talking to some leaders about some of the regional issues. And it was actually Kim Jong Un's sister that kind of raised a warning rather than the North Korean leader herself. So you're quite right. We're not exactly hearing a lot from him.
No, we're not. I don't think he's running the show anymore.
Coming off the tour I just mentioned there, look, at least one diplomat has been calling for closer ties to Japan. But like us here in Australia, a lot of Asian countries are now caught between the US and China in terms of where it comes to determining diplomacy and determining their sort of loyalties. What do you think's on the discussion table, Ed?
I I had a conversation with our ex-foreign minister, Bob Carr, and his assessment is that China wants to fulfill basically its known destiny with Taiwan and Hong Kong. And they're not out to beat up anybody. They'd like to come to the table, maybe as the wealthiest, smartest nation in the world, work internally to strengthen their capacities. Uh, but war may not be on the table. The question is how to deal with those extremities, Taiwan and Hong Kong. And you can't do it with strength anymore. The United States and all of its allies don't have the capacities to deal with this. I don't know what the diplomatic moves are going to be, but Biden's going to walk very, very softly.
And just also on China, there's been debate about boycotting the Beijing 2022 Winter Olympics, with calls from human rights activists due to the widely reported internment and some would say genocide of Muslim Uyghurs and other ethnic minorities. Mitt Romney this week suggested a diplomatic and economic boycott, but not one that involves US athletes. Any thoughts?
I agree with Mitt. I think uh, we don't have, that will not do anything to change the situation. We have to fill in our diplomatic void that occurred during the Trump era with something that's better, that will lead to the Hmong people and others being treated in a different way. I think that can be done without the US rattling its broken sword.
Meanwhile, on the US home front, voting rights seems like it's going to be a key fight in domestic politics. Republicans are doing all that they can to restrict voter access in some states. In Georgia, Stacey Abrams has described the attempts as racist and Jim Crow in a suit and tie, Republicans now only win by undermining democracy. I think it's actually really disturbing. We've obviously spoken about this over the last couple of weeks, but any thoughts this week, Ed?
I think a couple things. One of them is, the voting rights bill is up. I think it's US 1 or whatever it is. And this is a bill that would basically say voting rights are guaranteed along basic principles. It'll run into a lot of states' rights issues and the like. So I think we're going to really see a head-on conflict here. In some ways, by raising the head of this threat, what will happen is that more Blacks will go to the polls, and also more young people will go to the polls. So I think this may have an impact on the Republicans they didn't want to see. They're losing members of their own party, and they're not appealing to young people. So you can do all the tricks you want, but if you haven't got the numbers, you haven't got the numbers. And as soon as those numbers change in places like Texas and in Georgia, where there's likely to be a Stacey Abrams as the governor and a state senate that is far different than it is now, boy, they're really on the run after that. There's no place to go. The smarter thing for them to do is start recruiting middle-class African Americans, not making them mad.
And just finally, this is again reigniting the filibuster debate we've discussed previously. Biden throwing his weight behind reform this week, but Mitch McConnell warning of a scorched earth battle if he can't maintain filibuster power. And Joe Manchin, again, the centrist, indicating he will not support essentially reforms on the voting structure in the Senate around filibusters. Any more thoughts, Ed?
I don't know where this can go because the filibuster may be the only way to get in some of this new essential legislation, voting rights, Medicare revisions, improvements to infrastructure, and so on. When you got a 50-50 situation, you can be back with Obama if you're not careful. So at some point, the Democrats are going to have to confront this and say, if there's a scorched earth policy, we're the one who have the match and we're going to light it.
Well, Ed, plenty to discuss this week, plenty more to discuss next week, no doubt. We'll catch you then.
All right. Thank you, sir. And I think it's starting to start heating up. Both the American summer is coming and the debate is getting warmer.